Hi, this is Dr. Chris. Today I'm going to be talking about injury prevention and warm-up. Okay, so before we start talking about what is injury prevention, we have to understand what injury is. So it turns out there is a model that describes injury. It's called the I3 model. So the first I is incomplete mechanics. The second is incident. The third is an injury. And this is a cascade of events. One can lead to the next. So what does this really mean? Incomplete mechanics means you're missing range of motion. Right? It could be an active range of motion or a passive range of motion. We'll get more into that down the road. Incidents, when you take a tissue and move it past its physiologic limit. When I say tissue, you're talking bone, tendon, ligament, muscle, any of the above. And injury is when you take that, it's basically an incident. You push it to its brink, and then you push it past it further, causing tissue damage. So here's a good example of the I3 model. Okay. Now, most people can reach behind your back. If you couldn't, you could say you have an incomplete mechanic. Right now, this guy has got his arm pushed to the brink, basically, and he's probably gonna wake up tomorrow with some shoulder pain. So that's an incident. Now, if he had tapped out here in this Kimura, and the guy on top didn't, just ignored the tap and kept pushing, well, then he'd have tissue rupture. He'd have rotator cuff tear. So that brings us to plasticity and the stress strain curve. Okay, so stress, let me move my window here, is load applied to a tissue. So think resistance, weight, things like that. Strain is the amount of change in the shape. So if you bend over, your hamstrings lengthen. You stand up, they shorten. That's the strain. The plasticity is the ability of the muscle to adapt to the demands placed on it. Okay, so looking at this chart, you got the elastic region. So say you bend over, you feel a little bit of a stretch in your hamstring. You stand up, it goes away. Everything is back to normal. Nothing's really changed. If you hold that stretch for a minute or two, you're basically causing a deformation of the tissue. That's the plastic region. You're creating a change. Hold it long enough, apply a load, push it far enough, whatever it may be, and then you get tissue failure. All right. And that's how you tear a muscle. So here's a good example of tissue failure. Pretty hard to look at. Don't really know which way his foot is going. And this is just kind of to show that some injuries you just can't prevent. So I like to think of it as injury preparedness, not injury prevention. Preparedness is something that takes time. You can't just, get strong and mobile in 10 minutes before a game. All right. So if you look at these three guys and I was to throw a bowling ball at their knees, which one's going to fare the best? Right. This is an easy one, right? The guy on the right, because he's got better muscle integrity. So that brings us to capacity. The amount of force a tissue can withstand, that's what a capacity of the tissue is. And that's what you want to do, is it? So how do we build more capacity? Okay, I love this slide. It's kind of hard to see. It's a bridge, and in Spanish it says 10-person limit, and in English it says maximum capacity 3 Americans, right? So if you want to hold more Americans, you have to build a stronger bridge. So how do we build a stronger bridge? Well, first, this goes back to the I3 model. You have to fix the incomplete mechanics. Once you've solved that, then you have to build strength in the new mechanics, and then you build motor control. The way I like to think of it is stabilize it, strengthen it, and then dynamically strengthen it. So how do we go about this? First, fix the incomplete mechanic, and this is all about mobility. Then you have to build strength, and that should really be the focus of your programming, and then build motor control. All right, so what is motor control? Here is a good example. All right, this toddler here has incredible motor control. For every little minute movement of dad's arms, he's able to adjust. So motor control is really the skill component. Okay, so what if you're a runner? Maybe you're not playing a sport. Why does this matter? Well, if you think about it, running really is a series of jumping and landing on one leg. And how you land is really important. And anybody who's had knee pain from running or dealt with an IT band pain, you know what I'm talking about. So here we go. If you look at these runners, these are obviously elite runners. The guy all on the right, you see that angle in his knee? That's a genu valgus. That's what we call it. He's landing and his knee is turning inward. He's getting internal rotation of his femur. The guy in the middle, he's pretty much straight up and down. Now, it's not that it's a horrible thing to have genu valgus when you land, but over time and lots of repetition, it's less than ideal. You're going to create more strain and more potential for injury. All right. Now, even the pros do this. I think this is college, or is it pro? I don't know. But you can see a lot of internal rotation at the knees. Really common in basketball players. This is the mechanism for jumper's knee. So this, if you think about it, this is how you strain meniscus. This is how you get patellar tendinopathy. There's a lot of different things that can come up with this. So in prepping for this presentation, I Googled injury prevention, right? And this is what popped up. Now, if you look at it, follow the rules, maintain proper nutrition, stretch, receive proper hydration. Okay, what pops out the most? Stretch, right? So here's the kicker. Stretching does not prevent injury. This is just a couple clips of some research I found, and there's tons of evidence on this. It's almost dogmatic that stretching is supposedly meant to decrease injury, but it's just when you look at the science, it's just not true. Those are just the references to those articles. So let's talk a little more about stretching. So active versus passive stretching. So are you doing the stretch or is something doing it to you? So are you using muscle or are you using a strap of some sort? Are you propping your leg on a board and stretching? That's the difference. So passively stretching does not improve range of motion, it does improve range of motion, but you have to learn to control it in the newly gained range of motion. So it's a really important concept. Here's just an example of active versus passive. In the top picture, this is a passive sort of classic hamstring stretch. Grab a strap, wrap it on your foot, pull it to its end range. And the bottom, now you're lifting with your muscles and bring it to its end range. So one thing to note here is that you're going to get more range of motion with passive stretching. So active stretching is almost self-limiting. So let me just go back into that for a second here. So if you do a bunch of passive stretching, and yeah, you'll gain a little more range of motion. But you can see in the bottom picture, this person can only go that far. You add another 5 or 10 degrees with the passive stretching, okay, that's great. But now you don't have any control or strength in that newly gained range of motion. That's where the motor control and strengthening comes in. So here's an example. All right. So if you play soccer and you kick the ball, your hamstring is what limits the extension of your knee. Yeah, so if you spent a lot of time stretching, you may have inhibited the stretch reflex, and now the last thing holding your knee together is the ACL, and that's why ACL tears are so common in soccer. So is stretching bad? No, but it solves a different problem than most people think it does. So it doesn't prevent injury, it improves range of motion, but that's not something to do before a game. It's fine to do after sports. If you're gonna stretch, active stretching is probably a way to do it because you're actually getting blood flow and strength going. But you should really be thinking about mobility. So what is mobility? Mobility is the ability of a joint to actively move freely through a range of motion. So the focus is on the joint, not necessarily the muscle. So what are we supposed to do to warm up? Okay, so a few things to think about: oxygenation, perfusion, and mobility. Perfusion means blood flow. You want garbage out, groceries in. So one thing you can do is what we call a breathing spin up. It sounds silly just to work on breathing, but if you think about it, a lot of people are mouth breathers, and breathing through your mouth is not ideal. Breathing through your nose activates nitrous oxide receptors in your nasal cavity, which causes dilation of the blood vessels and improves oxygen to your tissues. And the other thing too is that a lot of people just breathe shallow, which will leave dead air in the lungs because they never fully empty out. Also, you get active flexion and extension of your spine, when you breathe correctly, which lubricates the spine. And it's simple, it's quick, only takes a couple minutes. So here is an example of what we call the breathing spin up. I'll let the video do the talking. Okay, so that's simple, takes a couple minutes. The other thing you can do is just to walk. So this is a great way to improve perfusion. So let me talk about that for a second. So there's the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. The cardiovascular system is all your blood vessels, and it has a pump to it. It's got your heart. So it doesn't really need a lot of movement to make it work. But the lymphatic system is very analogous to the cardiovascular system. It's all over your body. It's basically your drainage. It's your sewer system, but it does not have a pump. So it really relies on muscle contraction to facilitate fluid movement, and that the fluid has to come up to your chest. That's where it drains. So even if you just walk for 5 minutes, I try to basically just break a sweat. And so if you walk briskly for 5 minutes, that's going to tend to happen. That gets active movement of both systems. Okay, so joints. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, and you might want to be sports specific. Just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Um, I like to start with something full body, and then something a little more sport specific. So for runners, if you're having difficulty getting your knees up, you can practice some high knees. Golfers, if you have difficulty rounding your back, rounding your back in your swing, practice rotation with a focus on a straight back. This is a great drill. This is a good full body one. A little more emphasis on the legs. This is called the 27 squat drill. All right, I'm gonna let this play here. So there's basically normal stance, feet out, feet in, right? Then wide with feet straight, out and in. And you'll see that's the pattern. And then narrow stance, feet straight, turned out, turned in. All right, then back to normal, but staggered, straight, out, in. All right, and so on and so forth. All right, the idea here is you're getting a ton of ankle mobility, a ton of hip mobility, and you're really hitting all the corners of the hip and ankle capsule. And you're doing 27 squats, so you get great blood flow to the joints. All right, so it's gone to wide staggered. I'll do the other side. All right, and then this will be followed by a narrow staggered position. Okay, that's the 27 squat drill. All right, another example of something you can do for upper body would be shoulder cars, which is controlled articular rotation. All right, so this is one of those, looks harder than it is. The goal here is to not move your torso. It's purely shoulder rotation. You're gonna get good blood flow to the joint, lubricates the joint, really focuses on active range of motion. If you have difficulty doing that, you can do it up against like a wall to prevent rotation of your shoulder, of your torso. So to sum up, think of it as preparedness. You have to complete mechanics. You have to have complete mechanics or range of motion. You have to build strength and build motor control. It's not something you solve right before a sporting event. It's something you do over years. It takes continual preparation. Passive stretching is not bad, but it's probably not ideal. And if you're going to stretch, just think active. Passive stretching afterwards is totally fine. And then the key principles being breathe, get blood flow, and mobilize. Any questions? Feel free to email me. Thank you.